Recording. We are live. Hello, everyone. Mark, what's going on, buddy?
Oh, I'm just hanging out. Just at home, just chilling. Talking to you now. So I was having a pretty peaceful day, and now I'm talking to you. So.
I know. We're talking because it's Flashback to the Track, presented by Blue Emu. Yeah, it's got that Blue Emu right there. Mark's got it. Bam.
Gotta have my Blue Emu.
Super strength. Yeah. As if we didn't already say that sponsor plug enough from the intro to now. That's kind of, we'll just keep dropping it in. Anyways, it's subliminal messaging. So Mark, man, there was some news that came up about like this new series that kind of reminded everyone of IROC. It's called SRX.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that, man?
It's the brainchild of Tony Stewart and Ray Evernham, and no one knows what it is or what the cars are going to look like and what tracks they're going to go to, but apparently it's like some super duper stars of, auto racing getting together to do these IROC style events. But yeah, no one knows what that's going to be.
Yeah, to me, it's like a little, it's interesting and cool to always have like another competition or another way for drivers to compete and for fans to obviously consume this. Competition is just always great, but there's also obviously like Rock that already exists, which is Race of Champions, and that's a pretty cool series that does a very diverse lineup of like vehicles with their drivers, and you get a very diverse amount of drivers. You can have like Sebastian Vettel competing against like Carl Edwards.
I enjoyed Rock. If you go back and watch it on YouTube, it is really interesting how they kind of like mix the different styles of racing together, and it's all in like one weekend. So it's like a fun event they did. I think they did it in January. Or they still do it in January?
I think so, because that's usually when everybody has the most free time, unless you're competing in the Rolex 24.
I just remember Jimmy Johnson was supposed to do it one year, but then he fell off that golf cart when he was golfing and then like got hurt and couldn't go. Fun fact.
I remember that because that was like all over Speed News. Like, Speed News, urgent report. Jimmy Johnson falls off golf cart. It's like, oh, Speed. Oh, man, I miss that. But, I as a fan, I do miss IROC, but I don't want another IROC because I don't think IROC could ever come back and be what it was.
I agree in that way. Like I've talked about this with people online at all. Like, we got to bring IROC. Even just watching races on YouTube, all the comments are, I want IROC to come back. We need IROC to come back. I'm like, no, we don't. We had 30 years of IROC. It was great. It's dead now. And let's let it remain part of history, because it will never come back the way that it was, because there is not a manufacturer on earth that will put the money into it now that those manufacturers did back then. So I just don't see it happening with, like, what is Chevy going to come and be like, hey guys, we really want to sell whatever car, like James said earlier, we're talking the Volt. Oh, I want to sell the Volt. So we're going to have a series where the best drivers in the world come and race in these Volts. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's the thing. You look back at history, the manufacturer involvement of IROC was hand in hand all the way up until the Crown Royal years. But, when Crown Royal stepped in, they really saved the series, because that's a huge title sponsor. And that's another thing IROC also had, was good title and support series sponsors from True Value, Budweiser. And the manufacturer involvement was more than what people think of, like, stock car racing today, where it's very bland and the badging on the car is not very identifiable. Like, the IROC cars were not only identifiable, but they were modeled after the production cars and influenced the production cars. So, that's the thing. You don't really see influence from racing and production cars unless it's like, the prototype LMP1 Toyota hybrid has technology that might be in the Toyota Prius or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, the Camaro looked like a Camaro. They very much kind of like more like sports cars in that way, but were always told handled and drove like stock cars. But kind of almost like my dream of what stock car racing would look like. Like, they would actually look like real cars, but they would drive like NASCAR. So
yeah.
Just looking back, man, you just think it's like IROC was dope. Like
It was a dope rainbow, you know.
It was just taste the rainbow, IROC.
Yeah.
It should have been their slogan. They should ask Skittles for money. It was a really cool series, and it's existed in so many different forms, and they changed the format multiple times, and the types of drivers, and eventually became very NASCAR centric, and that's kind of where I lost interest in it. But I watched the final years of IROC when Crown Royal became involved, and when they let the drivers have cars that looked like their cars in real life in terms of colors, and they kept their numbers, that was kind of cool. A lot of people were kind of against that, but I thought it was cool. And when Crown Royal was a sponsor, it was $1 million if you won the championship. So kind of cool to bring that sort of monetary. It's not about the money in IROC. It's about hanging out with other champions and having a great time. But $1 million is a great kicker to throw in there. So,
and another point too, because like other than monetary value and kicking it with the coolest drivers in the world, I think another big point big factor that brought drivers to IROC, especially throughout the 90s, was the taste of NASCAR. Like you said, Mark, it was like the perfect NASCAR. So to a lot of these drivers, it was like, hey, I'm getting a taste of stock car racing on a NASCAR weekend, because a lot of the schedules, the races aligned with NASCAR weekends. So you're kind of in front of a lot of these owners and drivers who could, potentially see you and be like, hey, you like this? I see you're doing good here, and then the waters are tested. We've seen it with like a driver such as Wally Dallenbach or Robbie Gordon. They get the taste of IROC, and then they get hooked and transition over to stock cars. Even Scott Pruitt as well throughout the
and Max Pappas as well. But he's the most recent example of that, right? And even Sam Hornish, getting opportunities and then thinking, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I could probably go racing in NASCAR. So the thing is, though, IROC became very oval centric in the 90s, but that's not what we're talking about today. We have decided to look back at some of IROC's road racing history. IROC was a series that was founded on the road course, and I'd say the majority of NASCAR fans probably think that IROC was just like part of NASCAR. I did. When I was 14, I thought it was part of NASCAR. I was like, oh yeah, NASCAR runs that. Yeah. And some think of it kind of as just another oval stock car series, but that is not true.
So for this podcast, we're going to look at 3 different road races throughout the decades of IROC. Now we're going to look at the first one is going to be the 1973 Riverside event. This is race 3. Mark, now this was run in October, and there were like 3 races run in a row.
October 27th, that weekend, they ran 3 races. Top 6 in points after those 3 races go to Daytona in February during the Daytona 500 during Speed Weeks, and race on the road course to see who is the inaugural International Race of Champions the champion of champions.
Dang. Now, like we said, this is at Riverside, the beautiful 9-turn course, RIP. Dale Jr., Matt, if you guys want to do a Lost Speedways episode on that, that'd be cool.
You can go and look at the beautiful houses that are there now and be like, there used to be a racetrack here.
Yeah, this is the bank turn. This is where it used to be where that wall was. Oh, well. Now it's the cul-de-sac. But anyways, the cars used now in this race are the Porsche Carrera RSRs, because in the first season, why not have the most perfect race car ever to give to the best drivers in the world to compete against each other? Come on, the Porsche Carrera RSR. Now here's a fun fact about this car, and specifically IROC. The colors of IROC cars have been probably the most beautiful and colorful race cars in all of motorsports. But that necessarily wasn't by design. It actually was a product of the time. Now you see, street cars were sold in a plethora of colors throughout the 1970s because auto manufacturers wanted to give car owners that individuality and allow them to be identifiable with their cars. So Porsche in 1974 had a wide range of color options that you could have got a 911 Carrera coupe or Targa model in, like, for example, light yellow, lime green, orange, chocolate brown, India red, Peru red, desert beige, invisible Grand Prix white, Mexico blue, just to name a few. Now, Mark, I gotta say, probably my favorite color, if I could have gotten a Carrera in 1974, would have been either blue emu blue. Now, that's either like brand blue or like product blue. I'm not sure. They are two different blues. One's lighter and the other's darker. Everyone should let us know which is best blue emu blue. Come on, let us know. Mark, what's your favorite color though from that plethora?
I'm going lime green. If I had to pick one, I'm getting a bright green car. I've seen 911 GTRs in that color, and they just look sick. So
it's like a staple color for them, you know.
It's the thing. Like, give me a lime green. But yeah, until you mentioned this, like when we were talking earlier, like I had no idea this is why IROC had weird colored cars. I just thought it was like a thing they decided to do because that would be fun. So this is really cool to find out that it was like of the manufacturers doing.
Yeah, it was just funny because it also gave the drivers another way to be distinguishable and identifiable on track because each driver had a different color car, you know, more than just having the different numbers and names on the sides of the car. So just coincidentally, the fact that Porsche had these color options and the palette that they did, because if you look at this color palette, it looks like a palette from 1970. So it's very cool, and you see it throughout IROC history as the manufacturer influence having some kind of influence on the way the cars look, and it's beautiful. It's what made IROC.
What also made IROC was the TV broadcasts. And this race was broadcast on ABC's Wide World of Sports with Keith Jackson and Sir Jackie Stewart as your commentators. And Jackie's just like always, he's got the pants. He's got that hat that he always wears. I don't know what those hats are called. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But he's got one of those hats, and he's got some excellent facial hair as well. Sideburns.
I mean, I don't think Paul Menard or Sam Hornish Jr. got nothing on those sideburns.
Yep. Mattingly, trim those sideburns. It's race number 3 of the inaugural IROC season. There are 3 events at Riverside in October of 1973. You're in top 6 in points. As we mentioned before, you're going to Daytona in February to race to be the champion of champions. So this is a very pivotal and important race because a couple drivers are, you know, pretty certain that they're going to be at Daytona. Now, no one was locked in to the race in Daytona. It was still, you know, if you had a bad race and finished last and, you know, depending how things worked out, you could be eliminated. So you had to be smart. Some drivers knew they just had to be smart and just come home with a good finish to try and get in that top 6 because there's really no benefit to winning this race, you know, or going for the win if you're not going to make it to the top 6. So the number one thing, though, I think, James, you realize as you watch this broadcast is how amazing a road course Riverside actually was.
It's like so beautiful to see it because, you know, it's interesting to see like things before like development takes place and, you know, when the way they looked 40 years ago, because it's insane how much development and infrastructure goes into places. This place is deserted. There's nothing other than the fact that it's surrounded by race fans. I mean, this place would just be like desert farmland. So it's a very beautiful facility, though. It's huge. Like, you know, the best part is looking at the helicopter shots. It really gives you perspective of how grand the track is, but also how many people are there during this race weekend. You know, very nice. But can I get Keith Jackson's jacket? Because like that yellow blazer is fire.
It does look pretty sick. Like those outfits from back then, like they dressed so dope on TV, like in the 70s. Not like now, you know. But apparently a lot of those colors, why they wore yellow, James, because you don't know, is like that back in black and white TV showed up a lot better when it was white, right? Like it's actually a really interesting story. You can look that up. Look up TV yellow, folks. It's a really interesting fact from the black and white days. So the great thing about this race is that Mark Donohue is going to start in the pole, and Mark Donohue is one of the greatest American race car drivers of all time. We talked about him a lot in our Strange Starters Road Course Ringers video, so check that video out if you want to learn more about Mark Donohue. And kind of just drove away, you know?
Well, yeah. Like, when the other most competitive driver from this like series was George Floorman, and he was starting literally 12th. He started dead last because I think he missed the drivers meeting. he had a huge advantage. I mean, and George was also the points leader too, so he was trying to fight to make sure he could get to Daytona. So obviously, he needed to finish like probably inside the top 6 to mathematically secure his berth into the final race at Daytona. So, but like you said, Donahue just walks away from the field in this race.
Yeah,
and
so
beautiful RSR. I mean,
yeah, it's awesome. He just drives away. It's a dominating type day for him. We should mention as well, IROC did not have pit stops. These are short races. I think this race was like a very small amount of laps. If I just look it up real quick, this race was 30 laps. So 30 laps at Riverside, 76 miles. So not a very long race. They didn't need to fuel. You can get tires changed if you need them changed because you have a flat or you horrifically flat spot them or something like that. But there is a penalty for doing so. So no pit stops. Mark Donahue kind of sails. The other top finishers were Bobby Unser and Emerson Fittipaldi. So this is actually a really interesting lineup of drivers. Like you've got some of the top guys from NASCAR, and Emerson Fittipaldi at the time being an F1 guy, which is really cool because later on in IROC, we kind of lost that flair of having drivers from F1.
Yeah, and that's like a sad thing because like they're very interesting competitors to get into this, because when you have a very diverse racing field that comes together in these similar cars, you know, there's just a fun time had. And for them, you know, obviously it's not an F1 Grand Prix weekend, so you're probably seeing them in a different light. So we kind of don't get that anymore. But I think probably the greatest F1 competitor of the time was Emerson Fittipaldi. Definitely was the one of the better F1 competitors who competed in IROC, and especially after he retired and came back to IndyCar. I believe he had a bit of a stint too. So always one of the best competitors.
David Pearson in this race, another NASCAR guy. So he has a great run. He finishes 4th, and he's actually the only NASCAR driver that transfers to the final race at Daytona on the road course there. So really interesting how at this time, when IROC first started, because it was road course centric, it really gave guys like Donahue and Emerson Fittipaldi and Bobby Unser, guys like that, a marked advantage because they came from that style of racing, open wheel on road courses, things like that. Bobby Unser coming from USAC, Emerson from F1, and Donahue from everything. He's won NASCAR races at Riverside. So kind of interesting that he was the only NASCAR guy, but you got to say, like, they're at a marked disadvantage because NASCAR only went to like 2 road course races a year back then. And that this was also in an era where NASCAR had like 50 races a year. Like some unbelievable amount of races, all on short ovals, pretty much. So tough for them to work that.
I think like the Cup Series was still at a 30 race schedule. Yeah,
tough for them to like work that road course acumen the same way these other guys were able to.
And also too, you think about car development as well. I don't think many drivers had left and right hand chassis. They were still bringing their short track cars to run on the road courses. To your point there, Mark. So not really gaining that road course acumen and prowess. So when you come to a proper car, it's a little bit different because you're not used to driving a car like that on a road course. You can learn some things wrong, and that's probably like a point to that. You know, they just had a way of driving the stock car that they probably tried to drive these Carreras in, and it just didn't pan out.
Yeah,
but also too. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, you see guys like Richard Petty be a total non-factor in this race, just really struggling, way behind, because it's just so out of his wheelhouse and not really something he was ever interested in doing. But when you get the call for IROC, you gotta take it.
Oh yeah, this was like a very big motorsports event for the time. You had the gathering of some of the best drivers in the world. And, obviously Richard being the king, he's got to come. So for him to turn up was great. I was a little disappointed in Bobby Allison's efforts. He was always known as a really great road course driver. He's won the Continental race. He's had a really interesting background with road racing. And for him just not to pan out here was kind of a bummer. But, at least David Pearson, like you mentioned, was the only NASCAR driver to make it. At least we had a NASCAR driver in there. Rounding out the 6 that went to Daytona was our boy Super Tex, AJ Foyt. he made it in. He transferred in that final position. And that was pretty cool because it was on track. That was probably the closest battle in this race. But still, it was a really great race. It's really cool to see Riverside. You see this track that it's really long and a bit of a wide at points, but the drivers use up the track so much, dipping the car off. They're on the dust. It's crazy to see how much track limits at a track like this don't kind of matter at times. But man, I wish more tracks would be like that, where there was like serious fall off and consequences, not like all paved and nice, you know?
Yeah, like to add to that point, it's funny. I saw a clip the other day somebody posted of an F1 car back in the 80s, and a driver, I can't remember who it was it Kvyat or no, it was Carlos Sainz, and he said, they're going slower than we go now, but why does it look like they're going faster? And someone replied, because there isn't 800 miles of paved runoff around them. Like there's grass right next to the track. So if they mess up, they're gonna crash. You know, they're not just gonna spin off onto the tarmac. So kind of a weird trope we see now with tracks, but obviously safety is paramount now.
Oh yeah.
And because of coefficient friction, it's safer to pave all of the runoff areas. We've avoided a lot of cautions at Watkins Glen since we paved turn 1. So thankfully, we've also had a lot of track limits violations, but you know what? It's part of the game. So this was, unfortunately, Mark Donohue's second to last professional victory. He did win at Daytona as well for his final victory. It was the first ever IROC champion. So an American driver, as versatile as Donohue was, won the first IROC championship, which is just so fitting. But unfortunately, Donohue was killed in 1975 in practice for the Austrian Grand Prix Formula One race. So I do like to think of it as very fitting that he did go out as the reigning IROC champion. Kind of a cool thing to be a champion of champions, but then unfortunately we did lose him far earlier than I'm sure we would have loved to. So unfortunate, but cool that he got to at least be the inaugural IROC champion.
That is very fitting for him to bestow that title. But what was also fitting was the fact that the concept of IROC was interesting. It was something that people wanted more of. So in 1975, the series was back. There was a new car, though. The Chevy Camaro was running in the IROC. And now Barbara and Jay Signori had also taken the reins of this young series, and something was added to it. Not just road courses, but ovals. That's right. The schedule was now comprised of 2 road course races and 2 oval races, if I'm not mistaken, Mark.
Yeah, and they use that to kind of mess with it every year. They kind of like to change up what was happening rather than just do this sort of Riverside thing that they did every other year. So they moved things around, kind of figured out what they liked, and it was interesting. So year 2 in 75, they did Michigan, and then 2 races at Riverside, and then Daytona. So adding that oval race in, and the Daytona race was the oval as well. So instead of the road course, so you had 2 ovals and 2 road courses. So kind of a more balanced way to do it, to be a better representation of motorsports as a whole.
And as we move on, now this is really interesting because in 1978, this is when the series kind of like adopts this championship format that really selects drivers through different series, but in a very interesting way. So the schedule featured 5 races. Now the first 3 were like qualifying races. So you had the first race, one race was USAC drivers at Michigan. Another race was NASCAR drivers at Daytona at the Super Speedway. And then the final race was road course racing drivers that was run at Riverside. And they took the top 4 from each of these races, and now they were transferred on to what would be the final 2 races, which would be a road course race and a super speedway race. So you had one race at Riverside and another one at Daytona, and that's how you determine your champion. Now, I don't know about you, Mark, but that sounds like a dope way to determine who is the best of the best, with like actual fairness to each discipline.
It's interesting. So I push back a little bit on this because I feel like there is somewhat of a watering down of the amount of drivers, because you're allowing 12 USAC to compete against each other, 12 NASCAR, and 12 road racers. So I feel like so that'd be like the championship 12 in NASCAR. You'd be like, okay, duke it out for 20 laps at Daytona to see who's the best. Well, if 6 get taken out in the first lap and they are the 6 drivers, this is supposed to be a race of champions. Everyone's supposed to be a champion that's in this. So I will say, though, it was cool, but there is a reason that this only lasted 2 years. They didn't continue with this 5-race format with qualifying races. So Mario Andretti won that championship the first time they did it in 78, and then they did it again in 79, but then they stopped. So I actually, cool concept, but I don't think I agree with it. I don't think I'm a fan.
Well, yeah, and also to the point of stopping, it wasn't mainly because of the championship. It was actually because of an economic downturn in the early 80s. They kind of had to force the series to shut down, unfortunately. So with limited manufacturer support, they couldn't run the way they were going to run. So rather than try to put the series together, they put it on the shelf for a few seasons. That was until 1984. Now the series is going to come back with Chevy Camaros. This time, Chevy's got the Z28 model that they base the IROC chassis off of. Now, remember, these chassis are now becoming like 2-frame race cars, much like a NASCAR stock car, but they're totally different. They're based off the production Z28, and it's not the same horsepower, it's not the same wheelbase, it's a different car. We're not too technical on it, we're not going to go into it. We're going to focus on the fact that this car more so replicates the street car. It's really based off the Chevy Camaro. So much so that it will get its own version. But Mark, the schedule, when it comes back, it's baller schedule.
Yeah, so this schedule is very interesting. So the series decided to add Cleveland because Cleveland rocks, James. So they decided to go to Cleveland, to the Burke Lakefront Airport temporary circuit that CART was running on at the time, or the PPG IndyCar series, or whatever the hell it was called back then. One of the 80 million different things we've called IndyCar. And so that's really cool. They went to Cleveland. They also did, I will pull it up, they did Michigan first, then Cleveland, and then Talladega, and then Michigan again. So they went to Michigan twice. But, glad they kept the road racing aspect. And adding Talladega, adding the largest super speedway, in America to the schedule. So cool, man. I'm down. I'm down for Cleveland. I'm a big Cleveland guy.
Fun times in Cleveland today. Now, going into 1985, though, this is a big year for IROC, okay? Because the Z28's gone. But you know what we got? The IROC Z. That's right, people. This series is so cool. Chevy named a Camaro after it. That's right. It influenced the automotive market. Straight up.
That's right. I remember seeing it in Gran Turismo 4 and being like, wait, did the car come first or did the series come first when I was like 16? And then finding out that the series came first and they named the car after it. So
yeah,
that's a really fun tidbit. And in 85, James, we also got Mid-Ohio. So Mid-Ohio replaced Cleveland on the schedule because we did Cleveland once and we're like, maybe we won't do that again. And went to Mid-Ohio. Fun fact, we'll be back to Cleveland later.
Cleveland always comes around again. It's like it's like one of those dinner places when you go get the sushi from the tray, and it's that one plate of sushi that keeps coming back around. That's Cleveland sometimes. And also to the point of the IROC Z. I don't know how popular it was in Canada, man, but like in America, that's like such a iconic car of the time, especially for its cult following in the like the IROC Camaro, community. It's a really big car culture, piece. So I think it's pretty cool too with this series. It speaks volumes to how impactful it was on just pop culture. It's the Joe Dirtmobile,
Exactly. I've always been more of a El Camino guy because, I like the, it's not quite a pickup truck and it's not quite a sports car. I'm really more of an El Camino guy.
Oh yeah. You always need a ute, man. A ute. A good ute. You can always use a good ute. But as Mark said, Mid-Ohio's back on the schedule, and in 1986, Mid-Ohio is back, but Watkins Glen is also back, so it's a 2 road course series again.
Yeah, and Watkins Glen is the finale. So we're going to do in 86, we do Mid-Ohio as the second race. So they go like oval road course. It goes Daytona, Mid-Ohio, Talladega, Watkins Glen. So we do 2 road courses and 2 super speedways on the IROC schedule. So kind of an interesting mix of tracks. But that takes us to the next race that we're going to look a little more in depth at, the IROC 1986 Mid-Ohio race. Race number 2 on the schedule from the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course in Lexington, Ohio.
Beautiful. Is this the 13 course, 13 turn course, or what course we looking at?
Old Mid-Ohio course that I just found out this morning existed. So, folks, if you're familiar with NASCAR and the Xfinity Series going to Mid-Ohio, you will know that when they start the race in the front stretch, they turn left under the bridge and they go straight up to the keyhole. Well, back then there was a chicane there. They didn't go straight up to the keyhole. There was like a nice S-bend, and then they came around into the keyhole. They didn't pave that straightaway until 1990. So did not know that until today. And next time we go, James, we'll go on a track walk and we'll show everybody this, because I think that's really cool, because the chicane's still there. It's still a configuration that they can run, but I don't know any series that do. So,
oh, it is. It's a beautiful course. We talked about the car. Got the Chevy Camaro. This time, they got the nice little trim packages, the little IROC Z's on the side, but much like the Porsches that we saw earlier, beautiful color options. I mean, these were color options that you definitely could not get a Camaro in 1986. I don't even know what colors you could get, but they definitely were not as eye-catchy as this. I
like that they stayed with the fancy colors, though. It was an IROC thing. It's what made it recognizable. But the crew for this race, now we're on CBS. So we're not on the Wide World Sports anymore. We're on CBS Sports Spectacular with Ken Squire and Chris Economaki, if I pronounce that correctly. I'm sorry, Chris.
It's the Econo Man. Economaki. Econo Man.
And Ned Jarrett's down on pit road. Good old Ned Jarrett. And we talked about the layout. This is a really cool race, though. So as this race kind of starts in classic Mid-Ohio fashion, there are a lot of off-track excursions. So if you've ever seen a race in Mid-Ohio, people like to drive on the grass for some reason. It happens a lot. So Hans Stuck has an onboard camera. The onboard camera work on IROC was great. Like, honestly, just seeing some of the stuff that they would show you out the back of cars, which is something I'd never seen before in a lot of series. And also the pedal cam they would do in later races, really cool. But we get to see a great montage of Hans Stuck just having not the greatest of times.
Does get going. Hans Stuck, of course, congratulations on your big win at Le Mans. You ran awfully aggressive at Daytona on the high banks there. What can we expect out of you today?
Yeah, I tell you, they have put the camera in my car. I bet they know why they did it, and I will try my best to believe me.
Absolutely no time in the car on the track today.
Hans Stuck is spotted. He's coming back out. The man that won at Le Mans with Derek Bell in a Porsche last week has trouble just coming through the keyhole and gets it back in gear, and he comes firing down into this S-turn area.
A little bit earlier today, Hans Stuck broke the track record here in Mid-Ohio for sports cars with 107.413 mile an hour lap.
Well, there you see the crowd. There's Hans Stuck in the silver car, number 17. Remember, we spun earlier, getting it back together. And another point to be made of these stock car drivers, and we're inside of Stuck's car. He's closing up on the Moss car, number 20 right now.
Well, I don't think there's any question but what they'll try their best, Ken.
Yeah, Mark, man, he had a very interesting start, but I think he cleaned it up pretty well.
Yeah, it was he had an interesting race.
That's for sure. I mean, he was the fastest man at Mid-Ohio, though, because in his Porsche prototype during the IMSA weekend, which the race shared with, I mean, he was pretty fast. And he also won Le Mans.
But an IROC car is not a Porsche prototype with 800 million pounds of downforce and 1,200 horsepower. So
yeah, that must have been a challenge for him to kind of go back and forth, because during the race, it is mentioned that, a lot of these drivers were competing elsewhere, either during that weekend or the weekend prior, but they weren't trying to jump back and forth between two cars during the same weekend, much like Hans was. Poor Hans.
Hey, at least he has a cool name.
But he looked like he was also having fun too.
That's what we said is the point of IROC. The point of IROC is to have fun. But during this,
I was just gonna say he's just getting more track time out there, man, because he's already there with the prototype Porsche, number 1 on the charts. Now he's just having fun in the IROC car.
Somebody else having fun this weekend is Ned Jarrett, our pit road reporter. So let's throw it down to Ned, who's doing a great job reporting. He's going to get this scoop from IROC President Jay Signori.
We're standing by with Jay Signori, the man who's responsible for putting these cars together and setting them up. Jay, it looks like the cars are pretty well equal out there, but does the drivers make a great deal of difference here?
Well, I think the drivers make a big difference here because of the road course and the style of driving.
You had your men standing by just a moment ago. You thought Hans Stuck was coming in?
Hans Stuck and a couple of the cars got together going into one of the corners, and we saw the body damage on the left side, and we're feared maybe we're cutting the tire down.
Jay, you got about 20 men here that helped put them together. How do you keep them from being prejudiced when they're working on these cars? Are they prejudiced as far as any particular driver is concerned?
Well, I missed that, Ned.
I said, your crew here, are they prejudiced as far as the drivers?
No, the crew isn't prejudiced with any driver. I think they like them all. And they know, my guys don't know till the night of the event which car the driver's going to be in.
So I guess that does help to keep them all pulling for everyone out there, Tim.
Wow, you hear that, America? The IROC officials aren't biased of which car and which driver's going to win. Just saying, we can learn something from those IROC crew members and officials. No bias. # no bias.
Kind of interesting part of this race too is the NASCAR guys don't really factor into it at all. So Bobby Rahal started on the pole, and everyone's worried because Bobby Rahal grew up like 5 minutes from Mid-Ohio, and they joke that he's probably done 250,000 laps there. So like, oh, he's just gonna drive away from it. Mm-hmm. Fun fact. Did not happen.
No.
Al Unser Jr. passed him quite early and led the entire race. So little Al absolutely got done. I believe Al was 24 years old at this point, or 26. Very, very young, in his mid-20s, killing it in IROC. And Darrell Waltrip was very worried about Bobby Rahal, but as we've mentioned, not really a factor, Darrell. And but Darrell, you know what? He had a good race. He did finish 3rd, so good for him.
Yeah, he did, and Awesome Bill from Dawsonville, he had a good run as well. He came home 4th, so you had 2 of, I would say, road course guys, because, Bobby also, he did compete in the open wheel, but he also was a sports car driver as well. And then you also had, of course, race winner Al Unser Jr., road course guys, and then you had NASCAR guys right behind them. So pretty good diversity, I'd say, for the event. Like you said, Mark, there were a lot of off-track excursions, but, I got to attest that to how narrow this course is. I mean, from watching this race, after I've been to Mid-Ohio a couple times, and I don't remember it being that narrow in certain parts of the track.
It was much more narrow back then. It was wide in 1990 with the repaving, so yeah, it's crazy when you see it. Like, when they come by, you're like, how do the prototype cars pass each other there in IMSA? Like, I don't understand, it's a really cool driver's racetrack. And a cool thing with the NASCAR guys is this is probably a track none of them had ever been to before. At this point, NASCAR was all about Riverside and Watkins Glen. So probably new for them. Maybe they've gone testing there. Don't know. But I've never heard of NASCAR teams testing at Mid-Ohio. Usually they go to VIR or somewhere closer to Charlotte. So
yeah, you have so many other options around you in the southern region. So yeah, I could see how Mid-Ohio is definitely overlooked for the NASCAR guys, but I mean, it's still a fun experience for sure. And like to your point about being a driver's track, it's like you gotta, when to push, but the racetrack will come out and bite you. It's much like Darlington to the NASCAR boys,
You gotta race the racetrack. That's the number one thing. And as we said, little Al Unser Jr. He just dominated this race, took the win.
The Unsers won the first 2 races of the '86 season with his father winning at Daytona. Now little Al winning here at Mid-Ohio. So we should call this the Unser series, man.
Were these the only father and son to race against each other in IROC, James?
No, because we all know the Earnhardts did.
That is true. We did get the Earnhardts as well.
But we're not there yet. We're going to transition to there. Here is some more IROC facts through the decades. So, 1988 saw IROC drop Mid-Ohio and replace it with Riverside. Dang it, Mark. We had some good runs, though.
Yeah, we had to go back to Riverside before it closed. So, good to get another race at Riverside. In '89, they dropped Riverside as well and did just Watkins Glen. It was the only road course on the schedule. And then, like we said, Cleveland always comes back around 1990. They went to Cleveland, but that season was only 3 races. So Cleveland was the second race of the year, sandwiched between 2 ovals. And that race was weirdly run on like a Sunday afternoon, late evening. I remember Rusty Wallace and guys had to fly in for that race after a NASCAR race.
Yep.
In a 91, Watkins Glen returned as the finale race. But then, James, IROC made a terrible decision.
They did for some reason, because of trends, they decided to remove road courses from the IROC schedule. So after 1991, at the time the Dodge Daytonas and the Dodge Avengers of IROC would no longer participate on a road course. And that was a bummer because, like we kind of looked over here, the series was founded on road course racing. I mean, it allowed other drivers from these different disciplines to come in. But, throughout the 90s, a big popular motorsport was NASCAR. And with that, IROC basically had this identity of being a part of NASCAR because, they were always there at a NASCAR weekend. There was an IROC race. Logistically, it was great because a lot of the competitors for IROC were NASCAR drivers, but, Mark, it kind of skewed the field to be more of a NASCAR driver's field.
Yeah, this is a time when we really start to see IROC go towards mostly NASCAR drivers. So we start to see them do, 6 NASCAR drivers a year, half the field in a lot of cases, and going away from series like bringing in champions from Trans Am and, international series. We see it pretty much just be NASCAR, IndyCar, and Steve Kinzer. We say World Outlaws, but Steve Kinzer.
He was the king of the Outlaws at the time.
It's
but
true.
Yeah, to your point, it used to just be not so much sports car racing a bit through the 90s, but more so open wheel, whether it was IRL or kart. Because of that split at the time, too, the Divide had such a plethora of drivers to probably offer. But, a lot of those open wheel drivers use this opportunity in IROC to kind of test the waters into a possible future NASCAR career. We saw it throughout the 90s with multiple drivers.
Yeah, like a lot of guys come over, they see, I do well in this IROC car, and maybe I'll give NASCAR a try. And many ended up transitioning to NASCAR full time. Guys like Robbie Gordon, Wally Dallenbach, and Scott Pruitt, yeah, and enjoy their Scott Pruitt maybe not so much, but enjoyed their time in NASCAR and made a career out of it. But we did get a glimmer of hope in 2006 when IROC made the decision that road courses were important again. And they made up for not having road courses for years by going to, first off, a really cool road course and then doing it at night.
Yep, that's right. They went to the Daytona road course, which we will look at now in the 2006 IROC Race 3 at Daytona's road course. This is a beautiful 5-turn road course with 4 NASCAR corners and a bus stop included. Yeehaw, Mark. This is flying times at Daytona International Speedway. It's great that they're finally back here at this course. Kind of fitting. It's all where it started, in essence, where they crowned their first champion.
Yeah, and we're going to be driving this time a Pontiac. We're driving a Pontiac Trans Am with no manufacturer logos on it because it's not a Trans Am. But yeah, it was a Pontiac Trans Am. This is also the era we mentioned at the beginning where IROC went away from the cool, brightly colored cars and different numbers. Rather than having a number based on where you were in points, your number was your normal number that you had in your series, and your colors on your car were the colors your normal car in your regular series carried. So Matt Kenseth would have a yellow 17, Tony Stewart would have an orange 20, etc. And the pot to win was $1 million if you won the championship. So Really,
Big
when
money's
that
still there, yeah.
Crown Royal poured that money into the series in 2004, they kind of brought it back from the dead a little bit.
They definitely helped a lot because, you know, if you look at the series, like we mentioned before, there was always a title sponsor there, whether it was True Value, at times Budweiser and Chevrolet in the 80s sharing that title sponsorship with manufacturer support. So there was good money coming into the series. At this time, you just had a title sponsor. You had no manufacturer support. So I believe that was a huge hampering for the series because, you know, the cars were basically the same that they were throughout the late 90s and early 2000s. Visually, they hadn't looked any different other than Mark saying, you know, yeah, this similar color identification from race to race instead of variety of colors. And then obviously similar numbers, which was really weird because it was just nicer to see numbers 1 through 12. And now you got like 06, 03, 14, 20, like you said, such random numbers. But to IROC's, aid of like what they were trying to do, it is important that they did that because what other identifying pieces did they have to work with? It's not like they could have identified the way a car looked. It's more like we need to focus on what drivers we have and identify them. And it worked out. But, Mark, another point to the drivers, I like this group of drivers. You got open wheel drivers, you got sports car drivers, NASCAR drivers, diverse NASCAR drivers too. It's a great list.
Yeah, and the cool thing they did kind of in 04, 05, 06, they went back to having drivers from a diverse number of series. So 2006, we should say this is the third race of 4 of the 2006 season. It ends up being the penultimate penultimate IROC race. In this season, we have Frank Kimmel from ARCA. Finally, they recognize ARCA as a series to bring a champion in. We have a Truck Series champion. We have the Xfinity Series or Busch Series champion at the time. We have Steve Kinzer from World of Outlaws. And for the first time ever, we have 2 drivers from Grand Am sharing a car to kind of pay tribute to the fact that in road racing in Grand Am, you shared a car. You were co-drivers. So Max Angelelli and Wayne Taylor each drove 2 races of the 2006 season. This race we have Angelelli. We do get a great interview with Wayne Taylor, though, where he talks about the reason we put Max in the car is he has a much better chance to win this race than I do. So,
oh, hey, it's fair. That's the strategy in sports car racing, so why not implement it here in IROC? And, to the point of this variety of drivers in this field, all these oval drivers really don't have much road course experience. So they definitely took advantage of all the practice time because these cars weren't, your stereotypical road course car. I mean, it was a different kind of chassis. It had some pretty good downforce, but, there was also these newer implications of headlights, taillights, windshield wipers, and the possibility of using rain tires. I mean, these cars were equipped to run on the road course. They're really good cars. So it should be interesting to see because we also have a very interesting front row with Ted Musgrave and Steve Kinzer. Last in points, you're on the pole, baby. Woo! But that means Tony Stewart. He's going to start in the back. He's the pre-race favorite, man. And he's also second in points.
And we should mention this race is on the Speed Channel.
Speed.
Mike Joy, Jeff Tannen, Larry McReynolds, and Dorsey Schrader giving us some road course insight. And Matt Yoakum's hanging out down on pit road because that's where Matt Yoakum just does. That's what he does. He just hangs out on pit road. So,
Dorsey, you should have won Cleveland in '90, bro.
Yeah, had those issues, man. It wasn't his fault. Okay. The coolest thing about this race, though, is headlights. By far, they equipped IROC cars with headlights to race in the infield because if you're not familiar with the Daytona road course, they use the lighting around the speedway at 30% power, and there is no lights in the infield, so you have to have headlights on your car. So they put headlights on.
Did we mention this was at night?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. It was at night on a Thursday evening after the Grand Am race. Also brake lights, because you got to have brake lights on a sports car, so so you don't run into the back of guys. And the wiper blade was cool. And like James already said, rain tires, coolest thing ever. I really wish it had rain. IROC race.
Just the preparation was fantastic. Like to know that could have been there. It's like, ooh.
It's Florida in the middle of summer, man. I'm glad they were prepared for it. Right. It's a crazy race. I will say this race is absolutely insane.
So let's see who leads on lap 1.
Mr. IROC, watch Mark Martin.
Oh, guarantee you can go green, Mike. Green flag. One car way down on the bottom. Angelelli makes it 4 wide. Contact.
Here we go, boys. Off in the grass.
Kinzer got hit by Pappas. Everybody's going to make it through but one.
Sam Hornish Jr., the 06 car, all the way out in the grass. We've had a lot of rain here. That grass is actually still pretty wet. But he gets going.
Now they got to break for the horseshoe, and everything stacks up again.
I believe patience has already went out the window here on lap 1.
What did you say?
Hey, lack of.
Dorsey, that looked pretty clean for what we expected.
That's better than I expected, too. I saw everybody getting crossed up, but they worked it out. So far, we're not done with the first lap yet.
Now to the west horseshoe.
Oh, who's coming to the outside?
Stewart, 20 car.
Back
Where'd he come from?
to front. Dive bombing the outside. Trying to take Truex and Kinzer. He'll be on the inside for this final corner going up on the banking.
And guys, I got a chance to talk to him. Now remember, he actually ran in the 24-hour race. He knows this race course pretty well, and he's pretty sharp as far as running a road course race. But he told me these cars were very competitive, and he wasn't worried about starting in the back.
Well, he went from 11th to 3rd, and we just now are out on the big racetrack. Now you'll actually see the draft come into play on the high bank 31-degree racetrack.
Now, Larry, excuse me, Mike, to point out, when you talk about that, these are the same IROC cars we saw here in Daytona. I mean, it's not a big bunch of difference. There's been a few of them replaced through some accidents, but overall, these are the same type of race cars, same style we're seeing. Look at the brake smoke going in. Tires are going to get flat spotted, guys. Oh, somebody missed it, Kane.
Kinzer.
And what he'll have to do, he has to give the positions back that he would have gained. He'll be able to get going here again.
Back to the pits to get new tires.
Truex
Jr.
and Stewart emerge from that cloud of smoke entering the bus stop.
And Dorsey, make sure we understand how easy that is to kind of like lose sight and depth perception. I mean, we're racing at night, and these guys are not used to that. Come in there and get hard on the brakes. You can flat spot tires so easy.
It's actually a lot easier to do it, Jeff, on that end of the racetrack on that bus stop.
Okay, so obviously that was a very interesting first lap, but the biggest thing we saw from there was the fact that Tony Stewart just like muscled his way through this field. He obviously
the most laps of anyone probably at that course, other than Max Angelelli and Max Pappas. Like, he's got a lot of laps there from all the Rolex 24s that he's almost won over the years. And just the thing that's crazy with these cars, the amount of downforce they have, is the amount of draft that they get on the straightaways, right? Like, just going down towards the bus stop, and then you see the first lap Steve Kinzer just blow the bus stop because he misses the braking zone because they're carrying so much speed. And he's a guy who drives open wheel cars on dirt, so I mean, like, I can forgive him for that.
Yeah, so I mean, he's definitely gonna have to pit though and get those tires changed, because they're definitely flat spotted, and you're not gonna last long around here with flat spotted tires. Another interesting aspect of this race is that these drivers are more physical than I would say the other drivers were in the last two races. For example, you got Matt Kenseth, who gets pushed off by Ryan Newman. He's like, I'm not going to take that. So he goes into the next corner and just dumps him and dumps himself. That was interesting.
Yeah, it's a short race. It's 20 laps of the Daytona road course. We got to win this race, and there's $1 million on the line. So,
but also, there's a competition caution, man. I mean, everyone's going to come in and stack up and pit. It's, to your point, you got to get track position. So when that caution comes out, you got better track position than when you started this race. So you got to put yourself in a position to win later. But with Kenseth and Newman, man, they're going to have to put that issue behind them and work together and get through the traffic, get back towards the front.
We should mention this race is 20 laps with a competition caution at lap 10. So it's kind of split into two 10-lap segments. Stages before stages, folks. Two-stage race.
Trust me, 20 laps seems short, but this is a road course, and it's a pretty lengthy race. But so it doesn't take long for Tony Stewart to finally grab the lead. He took it from Max Pappas, who, Mark, I'm pretty impressed by Max. He's looking like he might try to dip his toes into some NASCAR racing after this.
Well, it's a perfect opportunity. It's a Thursday night of the NASCAR weekend. Get those NASCAR team owners get with their eyes on you. And he apparently already worked a deal for Busch Race at Watkins Glen later in the year and was working on maybe a cup ride for that race as well. And then obviously, as we know now, we see Max Papis spent several years racing in NASCAR after this.
This race has maximum potential, Mark.
Because we're sponsored by Blue Moo Super Strength?
Oh, no, I was just saying that because Max Papis and Max Angelelli are both battling each other on the track here. But that was a good plug, though.
So the caution comes out. Competition caution comes out. And this is the best part of the race. This is like just so great because there's one crew that's going to change all the tires on all the cars. And these guys are going to sit in the Florida heat and humidity inside these cars for what is seemingly 20 minutes while we wait for them to change the tires and service every driver. Luckily for them, Ted Musgrave is already out of the race. So one less car to have to worry about. But yes, let's just sit back and just enjoy. Just enjoy. It's just the best.
Oh, yeah, you changed that tire. Yeah, jack that car. Whew, man. Yeah, get that water. Get that water. What's this? Someone getting a shifter? I guess Max Papis got a new shifter. Wonder who that's from.
That's from Ted Musgrave's car because, you know, he crashed. Or he had a mechanical failure. So we're going to give... They took the shifter off his car and gave it to Max Papis.
That's perfect. That's a good use of a shifter. But, you know, after the race, within the race, it's time to get back going. And Mark, you know, this is where I just kind of like bang my head against the wall with this race because there wasn't really any cautions before the competition caution. But then after, there were just 4 cautions.
Well, time's a wasted, man. And guys are going to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more reckless because there's only 10 laps to go. Like we said, they're racing 4 laps. And, Matt Kenseth, Ryan Newman, and Mark Martin just all ran their fastest laps. Yeah, because time's running out. All right, we need to get to the front ASAP. And we get some very interesting incidents. Poor Martin Truex Jr. Misses the braking zone in turn 1 and ends up on the other side of the horseshoe and has to drive back and go through the whole thing. And then he ends up in the tire barrier. Just not a great race for him. And that's shocking because he's won a NASCAR race in a road course. So
at Mexico.
In Mexico City. So
yeah. And it's interesting too, to the point you mentioned way earlier in the podcast about how, you know, just friction playing a factor in why we have all of these tracks paved now. I mean, that was a section of Daytona that wasn't paved at the time. And that's how Martin literally ended up from the entry of turn 1 to the exit of like turn 6 onto the speedway. Just like hitting that grass, he never slowed down. He didn't slow back down until he came back across the track.
Yeah, so that's a reason that we have that completely paved now, and some barriers there as well. So really, another great incident, though, I will say, is I really liked when they all went into turn 1, and there was a great chain reaction when Max Angelelli got in the back of Matt Kenseth, who then hit Mark Martin, who then they all spun together. It was like a dual drift. Just look at that. Just absolutely beautiful. That's beautiful choreographed drifting. That's Tokyo Drift right there.
That's synchronized spinning, as Darrell Waltrip would say.
Synchronized spinning, and Scott Sharp gets through it after he gets tagged a little bit. He had a rough race as well, but he bounced back, you know, after a rough race. So really, the great takeaway from this, though, is just the battle between Max Papis and Tony Stewart near the end of the race. But it was Tony Stewart's race, man.
He wins it, claims it, and Mark, he would actually get the points lead after this race.
And it was a lead he would not relinquish because he would win the IROC XXX season. It's amazing that they have it listed as XXX. The final season of IROC. Baby. Season 30 of IROC. Tony Stewart is your champion. And the one thing about the end of the race, though, is like when Tony Stewart gets out, like he's just gassed when they're interviewing him in victory lane in this race. Like he's so wiped out after 20 laps at the Daytona road course. So if you're excited about NASCAR racing there, just wait until they get out of the race at the end. I hope they got their ice bags and their ice baths ready to go because it's going to be rough.
Oh, not only that, I just hope they have enough vents in the car because, geez, you think about it, like to that point, he was probably in the car for what, an hour and a half? How long was this race?
Yeah, exactly. About an hour and a half. And with the competition caution and all the caution flags and there's less airflow, folks, there's a reason the Rolex 24 is in January.
Yep.
There's a reason it's not in July. This is why.
And also there's a reason why there are such thing as local yellows and not, oh, we need to throw a yellow to bunch the field up and give everybody the competitive shot that they needed. So that was another thing about this race too. That was just with those cautions, that's what it felt like at times. I know that there were some incidences, but a lot of it was just because a car was off the pace or a bunch of the cars in the pack kind of like fell back.
But James, the real answer is, what's your takeaway after all the discussions that we've had today about IROC road racing?
Well, I think people need to learn about IROC road racing. First off, people need to stop thinking about IROC from the 90s and ESPN Speed World and that time. It was a great time. It was a grand time for IROC, but IROC's history is much deeper than just that period in time. It also showcases some of the most diverse and just internationally renowned drivers that got to compete in the IROC. And, I think a big part of IROC's history going back and looking at it, something that kind of maybe took drivers' interest away from it was how NASCAR centric the series became. There were serious professional drivers that looked at it as a serious way to, come out and compete against each other. But once it came to these NASCAR tracks, a lot of them saw it as a crapshoot, and, they're not there to perfect that craft. They're there just to compete in that race. So to them, it's just a crapshoot, put the foot to the floor and go. And it's not as serious as it should have been to them.
Yeah, it really became kind of, I don't know, like when it went all oval, to me, it lost some of that. It wasn't an international race of champions anymore. It was a NASCAR support series, and that's really what it felt like to me. And I feel like it always should have been 2 ovals and 2 road courses. If you want to make it a pure, representation of what, finding the ultimate champion, by giving everybody equal cars. But to make everyone show up and race at Daytona is just, obviously the NASCAR guys are going to have a huge advantage. So if you do different types of circuits, you give an advantage to each group of drivers at each type of track, and yeah, it lost a lot of flair for me in the 90s. It's just funny because, like, looking back, it's like I wasn't watching in the 90s, but I've watched a lot of it since then on YouTube, and it's just, I don't enjoy those races as much as I enjoy the races from, like, 1980 or in the 80s, because they're a lot more interesting. Like, even when we reviewed, way back in episode 17, we reviewed the Cleveland race from 1990, like, that's not a great racetrack, but that's a very enjoyable race to watch because of the different driving styles that you see and the brake bias adjustments and things happening in those cars during the race between Emerson Fittipaldi and, Martin Brundle and all the guys racing in that race and bringing different skill sets to the table. And I think it was just better when it was on the road. I think it was a much better series when they had that element.
Oh, it definitely was. I think another point to that as well is, the obvious track time is big. I think when we saw IROC started to compete on a couple of ovals where you had IRL drivers compete on as well, then the racing started to get interesting. Like, for example, 99, when Greg Moore was so competitive in the IROC car at Michigan. That was great to see because, like, that to me was more of a level playing field because these drivers had experience in their open wheel cars at the same track. So that was interesting to me. But then again, it was just all ovals, and then that loses a lust as well. So diversity helps a lot. I think it also arcs back to the great debate that NASCAR fans have had for years of how many more road course races do we need to add to the schedule. Even back when we didn't have a road course race in the Chase, remember how people were like, oh, this Chase isn't the ultimate test of a NASCAR champion. You need to have a road course on there. That is another point as well, that I think NASCAR fans need to look at the history of IROC and how they erased the road courses, tried to bring it back. Unfortunately, the series was just not at a point where it could be sustainable anymore, and it ended, which was a shame. Another thing too, like to your point about, like, oh, it could come back, and or for fans' points about, oh, it could come back and be its own thing. And to your point about how could drivers compete against each other at Daytona and not wreck each other. And it goes to the point of the driver code and the driver ethic that was around back in the day. Drivers raced each other and treated each other much differently than I see them treat each other today on the track. They're not going to just wreck them. They're going to give them the space. They're going to, treat them with that respect. I don't think I'd see that today,
And you never saw that in IROC. Did you ever see anybody dump somebody in the final corner to win an IROC race?
No,
never,
But
because these guys are champions, right? And that's not how you treat other drivers, right? So,
but unfortunately, that's how you win a championship now in NASCAR, because it's all down to one race, and it's boys have at, and everybody has that mentality of like just dump and run, where the ethics of other drivers are different. And I feel like once you get them all in IROC like that, it's just not going to be fair, because then NASCAR drivers are just going to walk all over them because of the aggressive driving style.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, man. I think this is something that we're seeing eye to eye on this one, man. Like
normally we do. I feel like we the only thing we don't see eye to eye on is the fact that you're all the way up north and I'm all the way down south. I'm like, damn it, why are you above me?
Yeah, man, it's cool that just getting to look back at IROC, and I'm glad that it's part of history, and I'm kind of glad we don't have it now. That is something we can look back on and be like, man, remember IROC? That was cool. And
it was
in a time where everything is rehashed now, and everything is just a remake. Just leave IROC alone. Don't be like, oh, we're bringing IROC back in 2025. It's like, no, please don't. So I hope Tony Stewart's thing that he's doing with Ray Evernham SRX is different. I hope it's not just the same thing. I hope they find their own individual cool way to do it. But in the end, also using IROC as a measuring stick is not a bad idea, and as an inspiration for sure, because it was so cool. So
yeah, I agree with that, because even in the last season, you heard Tony Stewart, because he was as being involved with it, because he was the NASCAR champion. He was very proud of Jay and everyone at IROC for adding the road course and adding that diversity to the schedule. He was so proud that he offered Eldora. He wanted them to run at Eldora. So to me, I feel like what Tony could do to it would be adding more diversity, which would be great for him from his background. And then, Ray as well. He's a very diverse driver from his seat experience, but as a mechanic, being from IROC, he understands that background of what IROC was and what not to do to make it like IROC, because he was there. He doesn't want the same thing probably, and hopefully he doesn't. I think the biggest thing we need to look at is the fan perspective. Much like we arced to the beginning of the podcast saying how fans think IROC was a NASCAR series. I don't get where the misconception was. I guess it's just because of the fact that it was always at a NASCAR event. But, to go in and label it already as the next IROC is already doing it a disservice. You got to let it be its own thing. It's got to exist on its own.
No, man, I agree. Yeah, it's got to be its own thing, and let's just leave IROC the way it is, and look back on it fondly, and remember better times,
the good old days. Montage. Looks like we made it. Da, da. All right, so Mark, which was your favorite race, honestly?
Of those three, the Daytona road course race has lights, man. It has headlights on the cars, beating and banging. That's a really good race. I really like the Daytona road course. I'm just very partial to that track because I've been there so many times, and I love that road course a lot, as much as it's not really a road course. I'm just always going to pick that circuit, I think. But I love Mid-Ohio, too, and that was a good race. Riverside's cool. They're all cool, but if I had to pick one, it's the Daytona race.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to stray away from you there. I'm gonna go with the 86 Mid-Ohio race. I just like that race a little more. Those cars just look so crazy. They're really just interesting, and I just love that field. No disrespect to the field that we see here, because I truly liked what IROC was doing from like 2004 to 2006 with such a very diverse driver field. But there's so many diverse drivers in this one. Hans Stuck, man, Hans.
They had 3 German drivers that year. Yeah. 9 Americans and 3 Germans.
just the trend of the time. But yeah, I think this is a great look back to just, talk mainly just about a specific topic rather than one race, and look at a couple different races and just draw the correlations between them, because there's definitely a way to look back and pinpoint things in history and just see how things have become and the way they shaped. And you can definitely see with IROC the rise and fall of it, and just kind of understand what made it successful. And if fans understood how much the manufacturer support played a role in this series just being alive, it just shows that, manufacturers really wanted to be involved in all aspects of racing, especially back in the 90s. Manufacturers really wanted to be some kind of like stock car series, and IROC allowed them to have their own identity, and for the identity to be just their own.
And the final thing I want to mention is that it's not IROC, it's the IROC. We've been saying it wrong this whole time, and Ken Squire always says it properly. Welcome back to the IROC, because it's the International Race of Champions. Bye.